Hi Salma, here's the feedback for the mock exam that you did just before Christmas. So looking at question 1, you got 2 out of the possible 4 marks here. So A was false. J. Rayner, the father, did not have good memories of his time in school. Actually, the answer that was right here was C. He worried about handing his homework in on Monday mornings. And then answer D was correct. F was correct and G was wrong. He didn't look forward to receiving feedback. And H was right. He makes a joke to cover up his own real exam results. So that's 2 out of possible 4 marks for that question. So if we move on now to look at question 2, where you're asked to write a summary of the differences between Eddie and Henry. Okay, so you start off well. You say that Eddie is a different personality than Henry. Eddie asks his mother for help, but then blames and criticises mum. In actual fact, it's his dad that's writing, so you must make sure that you're reading it properly and understanding who it is who's writing. So it was his father rather than his mother. He said that he's rude and he's putting pressure on his mum, makes her unhappy. And then you've given a quote here. And then I think you've gone on to say that Eddie spent more time on his computer than doing his homework, and you've given us a quote there. Then you've gone on to say that Henry asked for help in a polite way, not like Eddie, so that's a good point. And you've given the quote. Although the quote that you've given, I promised that I would write you a sly letter, doesn't really match the reason that you're giving. It's not showing that he's asking for help in a polite way. And then you go on to say that he knows it's not right that he's asking for help because you've given the quote, "You will not let Mrs. Smith know anything." You then go on to say Eddie's living home with his mum and Henry's away from home. So it's easy to control and check Eddie, but Henry's away and we don't know what he's doing. Unfortunately, this last paragraph isn't really relevant to the question because you're talking about the parents rather than Eddie and Henry themselves. So if we move over and look at the mark scheme for this question, I think it's, well, if we look at level 1, show simple awareness from one or both texts. Well, you have looked at both texts. You have paraphrased rather than given inference. So you've not really read between the lines and picked up on what the author's saying in between what he's actually written. For example, that Eddie seems to have a good relationship with his dad because he makes fun of him, so he does it in a fun, mocking way. I don't think he's actually intending to be rude. He's tending to make fun of his dad because they have a jokey relationship. And you could say that Henry appears to have a cold relationship with his dad because he's not seen him for 2 years and he's possibly a little bit frightened of him. You have given some text references and textual details from one or both texts. They're not always appropriate to the points that you've been making, and you have made statements to show simple differences between the texts. So I think we've covered the criteria for level 1. So if we have a look at the criteria for level 2, attempt some inference from one or both texts. I'm not sure that you've really covered that one. You've selected some appropriate texts and you've got some statements that show differences between the texts. So I think we'll go for level 2 and it'll be 3 out of the possible 8 marks for this question. Moving on to question 3, where you're asked to analyse the language that Henry uses to try to influence his father. Now, you started off well by saying that he uses a polite language to try to influence his father, and you've given some examples of "I hope, dear father," and "I assure you," to persuade his father. You've not actually said what it is he's trying to persuade his father to do. I think the key point is that he wants his dad to let him come home. He doesn't want to stay at school anymore, and he tries every way possible to persuade him of that. I'm not sure what this word here means. You've used it several times, and I'm not sure what it is that you're trying to say. So perhaps you could explain that to me. You've given the quote here, "Believe me, my dear father, I would rather be obliged to work all my life than remain here another year." And your explanation for this says, it suggests he knows he hasn't put effort in for this year, so he makes a promise for next year. I think actually what it's suggesting is that he hates it so much there that he would rather go out to work for the rest of his life than spend another year in the school. So again, he's trying to let his dad know how bad it is in the school. You've quoted your respectful son, and you said it's trying to make his father persuade about his request, but again, you've not said what the request is. He uses long sentences to say the reasons, and after then here's this word again. Again, you're not actually telling me anything in that sentence there. You said he conveys his feeling and tries to father think of him about his request. It is now 2 years, come October, I left you. I hope, my dear father, you will let me come home. Put pressure on his father in a polite and emotional language. Again, yes, it's emotive language, and he's trying again to persuade his father to let him come home. Looking at the mark scheme for level 1, offers simple comment on the effect of the language. Well, I think that's all we can say. It is a simple comment because you've not really gone into detail about the effects of the language. You have included some references and textual detail, and you've made simple use of subject terminology, but really we need to see more to be getting up the grade boundaries. There was a lot more language terminology that you could look at. You could have made use of the fact that he says, "My dear father," repeatedly throughout, which could show that he's trying to demonstrate to his father how close he feels to him and how much he's missing him. Or you could say that it could be a deliberate ploy by Henry because of the fact that they've not seen each other for 2 years. That would suggest that the relationship's not that close. So he could be using that purposefully to try and persuade his dad to let him come home. He uses a simile when he says that they're being treated more like bears than Christians, which again is emphasising the fact of how poorly that he feels they're being treated. So it's all about trying to persuade his dad to let him come home. He's trying to convince his dad that he shouldn't have to stay at school. So yeah, you needed to talk more about the language features and give more detailed explanations of the effects of the language used that he's trying to have on the father himself. So I think it's a 3 out of the possible 12 for this question. Right, moving on to question 4, where you're asked to compare how the two writers convey their different attitudes to parenting and education. As this is a 16-mark question, you would have needed to include at least 6 points about their different attitudes and perspectives towards parenting and education. I'm not really sure what you're trying to say in this first paragraph about the parents' attitude and perspectives on education and parenting. In the second paragraph, you do say that they both value the sons and they think more about attention and are worried about their achievements. So you've given the quotes there where Henry's dad has picked up on the fact that Henry spelt some words wrong. But you've not really given an example of what Eddie's father does, or his attitude in response to that bit. Here you have actually commented on the methods that the writers have both used to get their points across, which is good, and that's something that quite a lot of people have missed out. You said that Henry's father uses formal language in writing to the school. You said, "I remain," say very respectfully, in the quote showing how he's using the formal language. And then Eddie's mother, albeit it's his father, says that it's informal and conveys her inside thoughts and memories. She behaved and thinks naturally, and you've given a quote to back that up. So that bit is good and meets the bullet point that says make some comment on how writers' methods are used. However, I'm not sure that you've fully compared the ideas and perspectives for this question. You could have said that Eddie's dad seems to have quite a relaxed, informal attitude to parenting and gets quite involved in Eddie's education. And you could quote the fact that he tries to do the maths homework, albeit not very successfully. Whereas Henry's dad, it's a very distant approach, isn't it? Because he's been at boarding school for 2 years and his dad's not seen him during that time. You could also say that Jay Rayner, Eddie's dad, thinks that education is better today than it was in his day, and list some of the his issues when he was at school. And he's also very proud of his son's achievements, isn't he? Whereas Henry's dad openly states that he's not happy with the school. You could give that quote, and including the quote that you said about his spelling, and he picks up on that fact. So he's actually quite disappointed with with Henry's performance since he's gone away to school. So I think if we look at the level 1, you've made some simple cross-reference of ideas and perspectives, but you needed to go into much more detail about it. I've already said you've done some identification of the writer's methods. You've used some simple references and textual details from both texts, and you've shown simple awareness of the ideas and or perspectives. So I think we've met the criteria for level 1, so it's going to be a 4 out of the possible 16 marks for that question. That gives you an overall score of 12 out of the possible 40 marks, which, considering that's the first time that we've looked at a mock exam for paper 2, it's not a bad score, and we've got 5 months to work on building on your skills. I do think you will benefit from attending one of Donna's ESOL classes to help improve your English grammar and understanding, and also attending the catch-up classes, and possibly going to study services as well if you've got the time available, just to make sure that you are grasping the ideas behind the GCSE English and come out with a good grade. But well done, keep up the good work, your attendance is exemplary and you're doing all the homework, so you are working at a good level. We just need to make sure that you are understanding exactly what it is that you need to be doing. Well done.